Anathema Bones was dead. As far as he knew, he had always been dead, but today he was especially annoyed by it. The coffin he lay in was dark and tight, the dirt above him heavy. How dreadful. Thud. Mr. Bones heard a noise on the lid above him. Could it be? He sat up. Mr. Bones looked around the graveyard. Someone had dug up his coffin. What's more, he could move. Yes, Anathema Bones was dead, but he was a dead man walking. But what to do? Most dead men dream of what they would do if they only could get up and walk. I think I shall attend a feast, said Mr. Bones to himself, and try some of this food everyone talks so much about. But sitting at a feast full of delicious food, juicy roast turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, rich red wine, and fresh green asparagus, Anathema Bones found that everything he sampled rotted away before it reached his mouth. The wine dried up into cobwebs and the vegetables crawled with insects. Feasting would be no good so long as he remained dead. But how does a dead man come to life? And so Mr. Bones took to reading books, to learning as much as he could about life. But as he read, the words turned on themselves. The books began to declare that life had no meaning, that life was nothing but a lie, a cruel trick, an offensive joke. In all his books, Anathema Bones could find no hope that he would find life. These dead philosophers didn't even want it themselves. Mr. Bones got a job. A job! He knew that living men worked. He would work until he could become alive. But dead men don't work. They toil. Anathema Bones earned money, but never life. There, at his desk, he found himself more deadened than in the stillness of the grave. In his coffin, he had desired life. The man in toil desires nothing. And so Anathema Bones made his home among the dead. He walked with wild corpses. They wore their deadness like a costume and danced with no joy through the night. They held each other and felt no warmth. They sought out every pleasure and found only ash and bone. Nothing. 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 By the light of the moon, Anathema Bones walked. He walked in darkness until he arrived at a dark building with a tall tower, and entered a large room where he saw the strangest sight. A hooded man stood behind a golden curtain. In front of him sat a metal bowl and a carving knife. His altar was surrounded with bright orange pumpkins of all sizes. The man wore all white, and when he saw Mr. Bones, he smiled. "It's not every day that a dead man walks into this house of mine," said the man cheerfully. "I'm sure you'd rather see a living man," Mr. Bones replied. "I didn't say that," answered the man. "I was dead once too, you know." He picked up his knife and walked towards Mr. Bones. "Yes, I was dead. Don't look so surprised. I was murdered. But I rose up, out of the earth." "The great pumpkin!" exclaimed Mr. Bones. "Perhaps," said the stranger. "For now I am the carver." Then, laying his hand on Anathema's, he asked, "May I?" "Carve me?" exclaimed Mr. Bones. "Isn't that a bit drastic? I've already done the carving once for all." The man held out his hands. Mr. Bones could see 2 round holes carved right through them. "I want to replace your heart of stone with a heart of flesh, your mineral bones with a vegetable seed. I have come that you may have life." "Then by all means," said Mr. Bones. And at that, his world was engulfed in darkness. The carver had set something on his eyes, and Mr. Bones felt immense pain. Then he became aware of a new sensation. Moisture. Yes, moisture in his mouth, and sweetness and spice, pumpkin spice. His head was soft with flesh, Fruit! The carver had replaced his dusty old skull with a ripe orange pumpkin. And what a feeling! What had once been held together by cobwebs was now held together by fibers and strands. Juice flowed beneath his skin, and he could smell the refreshing smell of produce. Anathema Bones was alive. Alive and alone. Where'd the carver gone? Anathema looked around at the empty church. What had seemed dark by the light of the moon was now lit with the rays of the dawn, but there were no pumpkins save for the one on his head, no knife, no carver, only a cool breeze. Now, Anathema followed the breeze. It blew along the path and stirred up the fallen leaves. Anathema could feel its coolness on his shiny new skin, and he enjoyed the crunch beneath his feet and the warm autumn colors. He followed it wherever it led. Anathema was still following the breeze when he met Vanyta. But the sight of her stopped him in his tracks. Anathema had never seen another living soul before. But there she was. She wore cute striped gloves, cozy autumn clothes, and a bright orange pumpkin on her head. Anathema Bones and Vanyta Corpus fell in love. They joyfully followed the breeze hand in hand and celebrated the glory of the world around them. Funny, thought Anathema, I can still feel skeleton fingers beneath her gloves. Of course you can still feel skeleton fingers, said Vanyta when he asked her about it. The carver's growing life on the inside too, but it's slow. His gloves cover us while we wait. Anathema looked at his hands. They were hidden under thick leather work gloves. Why are our gloves so different? He asked. Oh, don't you know? Asked Vanyta. We all have different gloves, each for the special work prepared for us to do. Work, said Anathema. Yes, my gloves are soft and friendly. I've learned to love others well, to care for them. She laughed at Anathema's surprise. Work need not be toil. But what of my work? It occurred to Anathema that there were certain tasks his clunky gloves could not do. It was Vanyta who suggested he try digging. But it was him, however, who decided where he would dig. He picked a spot and heaved the shovel into the dirt. He was now at a task, a job, and it was a delight, wholly different from the toil of the dead. You see, Anathema had become an overtaker, uncovering the sleeping dead, hoping that they would wake and walk just as he had. And sometimes they did wake. He would uncover a casket and a sleepy skeleton would climb out. They were still dead, but never so dead as Anathema had been. And when the dead did walk, Anathema would walk with them. He led them along the path of the breeze, and though they couldn't feel it, they perceived the joy in the old Mr. Bones and marveled. Soon Anathema and Vanyta had a table ripe with good food and surrounded by living friends and neighbors, and the occasional skeleton. They would tell stories of the great pumpkin and celebrate his carving. They feasted. And Anathema began to read again. He was now fond of the story of the fall and found it in every book. He also found the story of the harvest. There was death, but there was also new life. He would tell these stories to the young souls, and they would sit in the grass and listen for hours. Life was no curse. And Anathema and Vanyta were wed. They danced in golden fields and held each other close. They knew where death still lingered in the other, but they also knew that they each lived, and that was not nothing. It was everything. Often, Anathema would help Farmer Schlaft gather pumpkins from his field. They would find the brightest ones and the nicest ones and load them up in barrels. Then they would bring them to the harvest house where Anathema had met the carver. Soon the souls would gather in the harvest house. The living would guide the dead and bring them up to the old table. There they would receive their pumpkin and their gloves. The carver could not be seen by the living except by some of the young souls, but afterwards the new pumpkins would tell of all the carvers had said to them. It was always a happy day. But fall gives way to winter, and though Anathema was happy, he and Vanyta began to feel old. Their skin was wrinkled and pinched around their faces. Their flesh grew thin and dry. People began to wonder, what happens when a pumpkin breaks? The bones below exposed again, would they go back in the ground? Would they return to death just as they had come out of it? Anathema just smiled and explained that though the fruit was wasting away, he could tell that there was now something underneath which nobody could yet imagine. His wife's fingers were no longer bony. When the gloves came off, there would be life, a more truly alive life than their vegetable flesh ever was. And so, when Anathema left, he left behind his gloves and his shattered pumpkin. He wouldn't need them anymore. The true harvest had come.